I suspect there's a little bit of both going on. Basically, science is one of these things where it builds upon itself. So once you discover one secret, then inevitably I think it's going to lead to other secrets. So it's really not necessarily the case that, you know, my neat little Android iPhone thing is an extraterrestrial device. Okay, this is really cool, by the way. I'm still figuring this one out. But I do think that we may have gotten a boost from having studied exotic technologies. I do believe that this is exactly what's happened. You know, we live in a world in which things are not immediately available for independent research. For example, if you really want to study the classified world, good luck. There's been some recent studies on the burgeoning growth of our classified literature. So in the U.S. National Archives, for example, all right, you can go through there and research the history of your country, but the problem is, it's estimated now that more than half of all government documents in existence are classified. So now think about that, which means that if you were to do research, more than half of your history, essentially, is secret. And that's our world today in the U.S. So in other words, when you're researching a topic like I do, which is UFOs, a topic that's definitely had connections to national security, I'm at an immediate disadvantage because I'm bumping into a wall of secrecy no matter what direction I go. Fortunately, there are a number of things that we have learned. It's not like we know nothing. We know a few things. But it's difficult. Really what you have to do in this field is walk your way through knowing what documents are legitimate, so knowing what you know, and then doing your best to fill in the blanks in as rational a way as you can. It's not always easy, but there's no other way to do it. Back in the old days, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, before there was freedom of information, and in an era when still, for the most part, people had a very high level of trust in their government. Those people who questioned the U.S. government on the matter of UFOs really had their work cut out for them. It was difficult. There were really no government documents then available to make their case. And then they were also dealing with a public perception of the government as the good guys. It's a little different now. And what really happened was that during the 1970s, for the first time in this country's history, and the only time really, we had a Freedom of Information Act that was actually worth a damn. That was during the Jimmy Carter years. We were lucky. And what President Carter said at that time to federal agencies was, you are going to interpret the Freedom of Information Act in a very liberal way. And your instinct is going to be to release that information unless you really can prove clearly that this affects national security. And this is post-Watergate, post-Vietnam. This nation was in a certain mood that it's never been in since. And what happened was, to the shock of a lot of individuals, a lot of people in government, UFO researchers came to the forefront of the Freedom of Information Act and petitioned the government and got thousands of pages of documents from the military and government about UFOs. It was an amazing moment in our history. Okay? Now, of those thousands of pages of documents, most of them are of mid-level or low-level classification, so they were not like super top secret. The ones that were top secret were mostly all blacked out. That's interesting too. But of the lower levels of classification, even those documents, they're pretty interesting. A few of them were fascinating. And they would describe, for example, U.S. military attempts to intercept objects that didn't look normal, that certainly didn't act normal, zigzagging and stopping and all of these things that are supposed to be impossible. And yet here you got one military document and then another and another and another. This is how I got into the field, by the way. So all of that came out through Freedom of Information. So whereas they don't prove for sure that UFOs are alien, they do prove that the U.S. military has been chasing them and that they don't appear to be ours and they didn't appear to be Soviet or Russian. And so where does that leave you? So right off the bat, what we absolutely know is that there are objects that aren't supposed to exist, that are doing things that are also not supposed to exist. And there seems to be some kind of trouble in paradise because, again, our jets are chasing them. It's not just our jets. When the Soviet Union was going through its period of breaking apart in the late 80s, early 90s, it was the one time when leading Soviet generals and intelligence officials spoke openly about UFOs in their country. Guess what? Same story. They chased these things down. They were totally outclassed, just as we are. So, again, we're dealing with a matter that's of very significant national security. When your military can't compete with these things, I'll tell you right now, that's a very big deal for them. And they're going to control that information as much as possible. And when people think that they can just have an open, honest discourse on this, they just don't understand. U.S. military intelligence community has infiltrated many, many elements of our public discourse, and they've done it for years. And not just in this country. It's everywhere.
Right.
Everything is tainted. It's very difficult to move ahead in this, but you got to do your best. I'm fascinated by their dilemma. You know, I try to rewind the clock in my own mind to the 1940s and pretend that I'm Harry Truman. Some top general tells me, you know, sir, we've recovered this technology that didn't originate from our civilizations. Interplanetary, as they would say back then. So what would I do with that information? I might have an instinct to tell the world. I might think this is important, but then I might think again. You tell the world about it, then suddenly you may have to share this technology. You may not want to share, certainly in the context of the early Cold War. You wouldn't want to necessarily give it to the Soviet Union, right, who you didn't trust, and all these things. So I think the instinct eventually would have been to say, let's get my guys around here, let's figure this out, and you decide how to get this technology to industry so we can replicate it. You decide how bad the panic will be, investigate that. You tell me, you find out who these guys are, do I have anything to worry about, and so forth. All right, so it's not difficult to see why the secrecy would have started. The problem with secrecy, as it always is that it develops its own raison d'etre, its own reason to be. It develops its own profitability, its own power. Secrecy is power. And secrecy is money. It's money because, let's say, 5-10 years go by, you've studied this alien artifact, and then suddenly some of your genius scientists have this eureka moment, and they think, oh wow, I can't exactly duplicate all of the electromagnetic properties of this thing, but we can do a few things here that are really cool. And they come up with fiber optics or some other really neat innovation, high tensile fibers or lasers or better integrated circuits. And suddenly now they got a nice money maker, a nice ground floor investment opportunity. What is their incentive now for giving this secret up? Zero. They have no incentive. Particularly when you consider that the U.S. military complex has has definitely been dominated by major industry since forever.
Yeah.
Since the Civil War. That's never stopped. All right. And so they have every incentive for keeping this secret. They have every incentive for exploiting this technology to make money. You give this technology up, you give up your power. You give up your goose that lays golden eggs. So that's one reason. There's a lot of reasons they don't want to give this secret up. It's, the UFO secret is one of the main initiators of what we would call the black budget. A lot of people have heard of the black budget by now. What is the black budget? Well, it's the classified federal spending. And the world of the black budget is a fascinating world of study. I think that we still really don't know a lot about it. During the Clinton administration, early on, there was a federal law that was passed that mandated the U.S. government to account for itself in a business-like manner, I think the phrase was. So in other words, to try to figure out what it's doing with all of its money. From that point, there were a number of investigations done by Congress that discussed the inability of the government to account for $1 trillion, $1.1 trillion, various amounts exceeding $1 trillion throughout the 90s. Rumsfeld's statement actually wasn't the first. But when he said it, the Bush administration was brand new. this was actually not a political liability for him because he could just say, well, I inherited this mess from the Clinton years. But now let's look at that number. He originally said $2.6 trillion, and that was amended by Pentagon accountants to $2.3 trillion. It's an incredible amount of money. All right, the Pentagon's budget in 2001 was about $310 billion, about 1/8 the amount. So the obvious question is, how do you lose 8 times your annual budget? Okay, well, part of the, and this is not to say that they haven't lost a lot of money, but part of that is because what we're talking about is not necessarily missing money, but accounting discrepancies. Now, I'm not an accountant, but when you're doing reconciliations, when you have $2.3 trillion in transactions that are not accounted for, that does not necessarily mean you've lost $2.3 trillion. What we're told, and again, I don't really know how true this is, but we're told that they were able to get that number down sometime later to only like 400 billion, 300, 400 billion. Right. Still an incredible amount of money. $300 billion would be equal to their fiscal spending for that year. So there is no question that an enormous sum of money is just gone, 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 gone. And where does it go? Well, I think some of it has gone into what I would call a black infrastructure, a secret, clandestine infrastructure. And I have argued for some time that I think some of that infrastructure has to do with the UFO secret. I met with one very senior scientist, a high-level person, very high-level security clearances, who knows something about the inner workings of all of this. He said to me, point blank, that not only are there programs at deeply classified levels, deeply classified levels, to study alien technology and alien bodies, he did say this, but also that in terms of the money going into it, it's a lot of money. He didn't tell me how much, but he did offer the insight that 7 to 8 times more was spent on security of the program than actual scientific R&D. So as much money as we spent on studying the actual alien bodies and their technology, 7 or 8 times more was spent on maintaining security. That's an incredible statement. Now, what does that mean? Building a massive underground structure? Does it mean getting a lot of guns to give to your security guys? Does it mean managing the media? Maybe it's all of those things and more. But we're talking about the secrecy on this is so immense. And this is another reason why they feel the secret must be kept. If people were to understand the magnitude of the secret infrastructure involved in this, they would shit a brick, okay? They would not be happy. We're talking about massive theft of public funds, massive trashing of constitutional practices, okay? I mean, look, we're not in grade school anymore. We realize it's not, the country isn't how we grew up with it being. I vote for my member of Congress, and we have checks and balances, and let's not forget the Supreme Court and all this stuff. I think we can all get the idea that we don't live in that world. Whatever we live in, that ain't it. But if people were to understand that even beyond this, it's a lot worse than they suspect, they'd be very unhappy. In my city, we get a lot of rain. We're right off of Lake Ontario, so we get a lot of precipitation. It's cloudy. It's a nice area, but we don't have as many sunny days as like Hawaii or Southern California. And so I recall, it was a couple of years ago, we had an incredible stretch of absolutely gorgeous weather, like 2 solid weeks, pure blue skies. It was incredible, incredible. I was out with my kids at a park one day. They were a lot younger. And they're running around, all these other kids, and I see all the other parents, and no one's looking at the sky except me. I'm looking up, and I'm seeing the chemtrails. Several planes crisscrossing the sky. And within about 45 minutes, they had created a very thin but comprehensive cloud layer. And the next day it rained. And we had back to normal Rochester weather, you know, clouds and all of that. Now, maybe that's another coincidence, but I don't know. Been a number of speculations offered, one of which would have to do with shielding of items from satellites above. Somehow you create a barrier to prevent that from taking place. Maybe, that could be. There's more nefarious possibilities that have been offered, of course, having to do with poisoning of the population, doing bad things to people. I don't really know what the truth on the chemtrail issue is. It's an interest to me.
Right.
I certainly agree, but there are people a lot more expert on it than I am, that's for sure. But I'm interested in it.
Right.
Continue to keep my ears open. Look, most people, how do we live our lives? Most people work, they 30, 40, 50 hours a week, sometimes more. They have kids, they've got bills to pay. They come home, they're tired, they pop a beer, they watch a little TV, they hang out with their people. When do they really have time to research, to question the latest piece of propaganda that gets shoved down their throat from the television? And they're supposed to wear their yellow ribbons and salute and do whatever. They don't have time to question this stuff. And they don't really want to. Most people don't have the inclination to. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of research and fanatical dedication to do that. And most people are too busy living their lives. And so they're not in a position really to question what's going on. So they have this sense, because people may be overworked, they may be preoccupied, but they're usually not dumb. They're smart enough to understand that there's something not right about their world. There's something, it's a lot more than not right. There's something terribly, terribly wrong about the world they live in. And what I find is that there's this very strong hunger for truth. People want to know. They don't know how to find it. And they don't know what it is. They just know there's something that's wrong. So they're willing to recognize that their government is not what it appears. On the other hand, I think many people don't really want to get overly troubled by it because they got too much to deal with. But yeah, I think it's a lot worse than most of us think. You go back 5,000 years ago, which was the same thing. Every elite has to control the minds of their people. There are no exceptions. Whether it's ancient Egypt, whether it's the Middle Ages or China or during the Cold War or during today in the United States, there are always those who sit at the top of our social economic food chain, and they have to find a way to keep themselves where they are. You know, in the olden days, they used to use the churches for that. And they still are not averse to that. But now what's far better, of course, is during the 20th century, television. And now what they're really scrambling to do is to control the internet. And that's a bit of a challenge for them. It's only 20 years ago that the internet was this new thing. I do believe that the explosion of global connectiveness on the internet is not something that these elites, in other words, have been fully able to control. It's gotten a little bit out of their control. And what you find around the world is it's not just Iran, not just North Korea, not just China, but Australia, Britain, United States, Western nations that are trying to move toward controlling their internet. Britain just passed a couple of nasty laws along these lines. But you find this everywhere. There are always the attempts. And so what they're trying to do is manage public discourse. By and large, even regarding the internet, they have succeeded. How do most people get their news? What do most people really do on the internet? They surf, they watch sports or other stuff. You know, stuff that really is not all that particularly germane to what's truly going on. It's just fluff entertainment. I mean, think of it this way. Every society's got a certain number of pegs for people to fit into, you know, little holes to put the pegs into. And most of the holes are kind of boring. You have to grow up, you got to do this job day in, day out, and you got to do it. So if you have a boring job, it's going to be very difficult to kind of cultivate the mindset of the inquiring Renaissance man. Mm-hmm. You really don't have the chance to do it. And what happens, I've always felt, is that societies inexorably have a way of producing the kinds of personalities that they need to do all the various jobs. And most of those personalities are just not going to be all that creative.
Right.
You know, you can't have a bunch of philosophical PhDs working at Mickey D's for their whole lives. They'll go crazy, and they will find a way to adapt themselves to that environment. I really think that's what happens. So that's probably the simplest matter of social control. But definitely, look, all elites throughout history have controlled the ideologies of their society as much as they're able to. And one of the key things they've had to do is you keep the masses docile and you keep them working for you. Napoleon Bonaparte famously said about religion that it was the greatest thing. It allowed for people to be obedient. It was a great social control tool, and I think all rulers have understood that. But whereas in the past it was religion, now it's religion plus a bunch of other things. The entertainment society that pervades it's even better than religion. It just keeps people distracted. Watch American Idol, watch MTV Spring Break, which I sometimes feel like I'm still not old enough to watch that, right? So there's all of these distractions that are fun. You watch them, and now, my kids, they surf on YouTube all the time. YouTube's better than TV. You just surf, and you could lose your whole day in video games, in YouTube, and all of these other things. Basically, honestly, wasting your time, wasting your life with this stuff. Because 50 years go by, then you look back at your life and you think, what the hell have I been doing? I haven't done shit. People are going to come to that. This is the big thing, I think, about what an ET reality will do for us. I have one hope here. All right? When this phenomenon is going to come out somehow. I don't know what the trigger is going to be, but I do know we're going through such a revolutionary change in our civilization. All right, this is not like the 1950s, and it's not like the 1990s. We're in something totally different now. And around the world, people are developing the means to detect this, technologically, if nothing else. Something's going to happen, and when it does, we're going to be presented with the reality that there is some non-human intelligence that has been interacting with us in a major way. And my feeling is one thing that it will do, you're going to have a period where people will, run around in circles and pull their hair out of their heads, and they'll panic and all of that stuff. But eventually, I think people will calm down. And when we're presented with the reality of, let's say, a species where their average IQ is 250 or something really super high, we may be looking at ourselves a little more critically, and we may be thinking, are we ready in some way to deal with these beings? And I think it could be a spur for us to kind of get our A game going and to look at ourselves a little more critically and to recognize the need to expand our own consciousness, our own thinking about the world. I think that's really possible. It's a hope that I hold out for the whole disclosure of the ET phenomenon. ET, or they may not be extraterrestrial anyway. They could be ultra-terrestrial. They could be interdimensional. They could just live here. Mm-hmm. They could be under the ground. I think some of them are, actually. There's a lot of possibilities, but nonetheless, when we know about them, I think that and only that is likely to be the real spur to us that'll enable us to kind of leapfrog over where we're currently at, which is in this basically a mindless entertainment culture that future generations down the road, many years from now, they're going to look back and they're going to see an entire series of generations that have just, we used to talk about the lost generation of World War I. We got lost generations today. They're lost in their video games. They're just zoned out. It could get worse, but it could get better. I think it could get better if we're presented with an ET reality. I think it would be enough to wake us up a little bit. I will say I'm encouraged. Like, I have a lot of one-on-one meetings with people in my private life. They find out that I'm this UFO writer, and they get into it. And a lot of people get very curious, and they ask me a lot of questions. When I'm one-on-one with somebody, what I find is even if they've been in this tiny little reality box their whole lives, they're often ready to jump out of it. They're often ready to learn a little more. I think for many people, they're not aware that there is another way to look at their world until they meet someone who does look at that world very differently. And so I've just found personally that many people I talk to, they get into it and they wake up. I want to go through my life turning on as many light bulbs as I can.
Right.
I think that's one of the best things that I can do with my time while I've got it, is to turn on those light bulbs. And I'm still trying to turn on my own.
Right.
I feel like, in the movie The Matrix, where Morpheus offers Neo that red pill. He says, you got the blue pill, you got the red pill, right? You take the blue pill, you can just go back to your bed and everything will be just as it was. You take the red pill, and nothing's going to be the same, right? Well, I wish it were that easy. I would just take one damn red pill and I'd be done with it. The way it actually is I take like a new red pill every year. That's how actually I feel. So like, I'll study this reality, and then I feel like I rip away one layer of BS, and I'm like, oh, I understand something new. And that'll hold for maybe a year or so, and then something's just not right, and you rip open another layer. It hasn't stopped. I've been doing this almost 20 years. More than 20 years. Before I even did UFOs, I've been trying to get at the base, the actual truth of my world here.
Get at the heart of things. Yeah.
I just keep going, and I don't know how much farther I'll end up going, but I keep trying to do this for myself, and I want to help other people do it as well. 50 years ago, it was a lot easier in many ways. You'd grow up, you wouldn't even have to graduate high school, really. You'd find a job at some manufacturing facility, you work there. You'd make enough money to buy a house. Can't do that today, not even a chance. So young people have to really scramble in a world where you don't even know if you're going to have the same job 5 years from now, let alone, for God forbid, 20, 30 years. That's impossible. Whereas ages ago, that was the norm. You get a job, you think you got it for life. And so it's very difficult for people going into the workforce today to have the confidence that they have a stable environment. They don't have a stable environment. We all know that. It's very hard. Bertrand Russell, 100 years ago, more than that, spoke of public education as basically a tool for social control. That's all it is. That's why I've homeschooled my children, by the way. I've got 2 kids. We've homeschooled them. I raise independent thinking kids. They're a lot smarter than me. Kind of a pain in the neck at times, but I don't complain. Social control is what it's all about, and that is what the schools are about. They've always been about that. As long as we have public schools and private schools too, they will always be about that. Because what every social elite needs to do is you've got to train a small cadre of elite to take your place. You've got to create that. And you've got to create the worker bees. Think of it this way. If, in terms of the ownership of wealth, this makes it very clear. I've studied this a lot. If you were to pretend that the United States is a room of, let's say, 100 people, let's say that's the whole country, and all of the money in that room equals $100. So, okay, so in that room, if this were an ideal utopian community, we'd all have $1, right? Maybe we'd sing songs and hold hands and so forth. But actually, in our little room, in reality, one guy would own about 45 of those dollars. Okay? And then the next guy after him owns about 10 or 11 dollars. And that's our country today. That's really our world today. So now ask yourself this. In that room, you've got all these things that make it go. Political institutions, financial institutions, laws, media, schools, elections. Ask yourself who's going to be in the best position to manage or manipulate those institutions for his own benefit. Well, that guy with the 45 bucks, we might legitimately call the owner class of the society. He might enlist the help of the guy with $11, who we might call the manager. And then you've got, you know, a bunch of people with like 25 cents in their pocket or 10 cents. They do all the work. They're the worker bees. Then you got people at the very bottom. They got nothing, less than nothing. You might call them the expendables. And that sounds harsh, but every society's got those four classes. The owners, the managers, the workers, and the people at the bottom and below. And that is how those guys at the top want it, because that's how they get to get all their neat stuff. All they want to do is own everything. But we're moving into a world today, it's no different, but now the stakes are even higher because those elites at the top of our food chain, they want to privatize the whole world. They want to own the water you drink. They want to own the food you eat. They want to control it all through genetically modified foods, for example. They want to poison you with a lot of crap that's in that food too, by the way. They want to control probably the air you breathe at some point. They're going to figure out a way to make you pay for that. So that's what it's about. Privatization of the resources of the globe on a large scale. It's just one of the many nasty little things that we have to deal with in this world. But it's about ownership, really, to get back to your point about social control. Okay? For example, when you have these elections every 4 years, one issue that they never talk about is the basic one of who owns what.
Right.
Who owns what? If you're going to look at any society, that's the most important thing, I should think, and it's the one thing that is never discussed. Ever. In the news media, in any political science university class, you think they talk about that stuff? I see no evidence that anyone discusses it. I talk to a lot of political science graduates. They don't seem to get that. So it's not out there. But it's the most fundamental issue. Who owns what? That's not discussed during election time. No, what's discussed are issues that will never be resolved. Abortion. Who the hell's going to solve that one? No one. Ever. Okay?
Right.
Waving the flag. All of these issues of patriotism. Meaningless crap. Filling people's heads with these things. Never get resolved. That's what election time's all about. So in other words, that's social control. That's filling people's heads with irrelevancies. I'm not saying the abortion issue is irrelevant. What I'm saying is, if you're talking about the issue of power in society, it's irrelevant. There's lots of analogies you can pull out. In my first volume of history, volume 1 of UFOs and the National Security State, I likened it to not quite like a guy driving a car, but more like a person riding a horse, and the public is the horse. So it's not like we have no will. The public does have a will, but if you're a good rider, you know how to manage your animal. You know how to coax it and make it do what you want. Sometimes that horse will be a spirited one, and sometimes not. But if you're a good rider, you can ride it. And that's really what they do. But they're like a magician too, you know. Fake you out.
Right.
Like a good basketball player can go one way and then move the next.
Right.
Next thing you know, you're beaten. It's a tricky issue in a way. I agree with you that if we're not responsible for our actions, well then who is? So we do have to take responsibility. Sadly, I feel that it's very easy for people to forget that they are the masters of their destiny. It's very easy for people to go through their life feeling, I've got this obligation, I've got this one, I've got this, and I have all these things I have to do. And sometimes it's true. You wait till you start raising the kids. They will take over. There are always obligations. But people often it's easy for us to forget that we have to control our mind, because if we don't, someone else will. And the sad fact is that those groups, those elites who do have the wherewithal to control social institutions, they know all about how to push the right button. They know how to push the right buttons to get you to do what they want you to do, for the most part. Right. So how do we get out of that? Well, they would say, what's the problem? You know, you're good just the way you are. But most of us, I think, would like to wake up. I have a personal philosophy that's very much in line with Zen. And what I mean by that is I really believe in awareness of the world around me and trying to cultivate a Zen-like awareness. And that doesn't mean zoning out into some fantasy land. It's the exact opposite. It means being aware of the world that I live in. I mean, really aware. That's not always easy to do. It's very easy to spin out into some fantasy. But I think the more we kind of remind ourselves of, the more I remind myself of having a higher awareness of my world, the more of a habit it becomes. The process of awakening, though, is a painful one because what it will mean, and this is really relevant for whether we're talking about UFOs or other conspiracies and cover-ups, because frankly, people themselves are complicit in these cover-ups. 9/11, it's another big one, okay? You live a lie long enough, you become emotionally invested into that lie. And this is the difficult thing people have. And so, when you start, if you've lived a whole lifetime with a worldview that is actually really harmful to you and to people around you, or a worldview that is filled with one layer of lie encrusted on top of another and another and another, I'll tell you right now, most people do not, when they're 40, 50, 60 years old, want to come to the realization that their whole life has been lived with an illusion. They don't want to do that. It's a very painful thing to face, and they'll do anything not to do it. It takes a very special person who's gone that long into the matrix to try to pull themselves out. It's very hard. It's a shock to them. And so I have a lot of sympathy for people in that situation. I don't want to cause people pain. I really don't. I have family reunions every year. I've got a lot of relatives. I love them. But they're just not in a place that I'm at. I don't think they'll ever voluntarily be in a place that I'm at. I don't want to... What do you say to these people? You know, you have an aunt that you've loved your whole life, and she's a sweet lady, and do you want to, like, crush her world beliefs? I don't. I really don't. Right. On the other hand, what I would say is, for those people who want to listen, for those people who want to see, okay, what I would say to them is, it's a lot of work, it's going to be a lot of pain. You'll have to look at yourself. Here's an example. I've gone through my whole life. I was always a very good student. Hey, one time I was a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship. It was kind of cool for me. I interviewed with the Rhodes Committee. Didn't get it, but hey, I got in. I got into the interview anyway. I studied graduate school. I did very well there. I always prided myself on being ahead of the curve. I always prided myself on knowing a little more than the next guy. And then I encountered, in my early, mid-30s, the UFO phenomenon. And that rocked my world. And the reason it did is because I spent about a year lying in bed looking at the ceiling, you know, when I tried to go to sleep. Because I would think, if this is actually legitimate as it now appears, and all of the history that I thought I knew is either grossly inadequate or, more than that, total bullshit. And I thought, how do I put this all together? Now, I was at a young enough age in my life at that time that I wasn't completely invested in the Matrix, okay? And I was able to kind of pull myself out. But it's very hard. It was hard for me, and I was motivated, and I was inclined to kind of look into this. So for people who don't have that motivation, they don't really have the inclination, it's really difficult. And the longer you are in that world, in that mindset, the less inclined you're going to be to pull yourself out. I really have come to feel that, you remember back in the 1960s, there was an expression, never trust anyone over 30. Sounds really extreme. Yeah. But there's something to this. And what the truth about that is that once someone hits about age 30, they really start to shut down mentally. Because you turn 30, and that's the age at which most people, they look over their shoulder and they think, I'm going to die one day. They realize they're mortal. They realize then they're also assessing their lives. Everyone grows up with certain ideas about what they'll be when they're grown up. And when you're 30, you can't really avoid the fact that now you're grown up. Okay? In your 20s, you can kind of fake your way through and pretend that you're not. You hit 30, you get to that realization, and you assess your life. It's any reflective person going to do this. Well, now I got to grow up. I have to put away childish things. I've got to think like a grown-up. Can't be silly anymore. And there's very frequently a kind of solidification of the worldview that takes place at around that time. And then really for the next 50 years of their life, it's like they just thinking the same thoughts, stuck at that point. There are always exceptions. I'm hoping that people watching this will be exceptions, but there are a lot of people who are not exceptions. I think it's almost a normal part, I don't want to say normal good, but it seems to be the norm in most of our societies, just by the nature of what life is. Life is hard work. You got to work to do things, and that means you've got to put your nose to the grindstone, so to speak. Time for creative philosophy, well, for many people, just they put that away.
All right.
In my case, there's always been something inside me. I'm 47 now. There's always been something that continues to drive me to explore. I've always been able to work for myself. It's been a struggle, I'll tell you. It's not easy, but I've done it. There's always been this voice inside me that says, you've got to stay independent. You've got to keep pushing yourself. And I hope I push myself till the day I die. Because I've learned that there's a lot I still don't know. And I want to know as much as I can. I've got this masochistic side of me that just wants to know stuff. Our life is an incredibly precious gift. We could just as easily not have one. It's like you're at the beach and you see this beautiful pearl, and that's your life. And the sad thing is that most people just take it and they just throw it away. They don't care. They live, instead of living 80 years, they live like 1 year 80 times. At least after they get to their adulthood. They just over and over, and they get into this mode that's the same. They become like intelligent robots. But it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. Our life is an extraordinary gift that if we treat it with respect, it can be a thing of beauty every single day. It really can be. I really try to remind myself that every moment I live is a miracle. It really is. And as difficult, as crazy as my life is sometimes, I am grateful every single day for what I have. I'm grateful for this interview and have the chance to talk to you, which I've enjoyed very much. And I hope I have, I may hope that I have many more of them, but I try also to focus on each moment. Because it's only the moment that we have. That's our gift. And if I try to fixate on the future or fixate on the past, then what I'm not doing is focusing on the moment, which is the miracle. And every moment is its own miracle. That's called awareness. It's something that I hope that we can all try to work to cultivate. If/when there's kind of a reality of these others that are here, I really believe it's only through a kind of heightened awareness of ourselves, through a lot of hard work, in other words, that we're going to be able to get ourselves to a level of consciousness where we actually have an opportunity to deal with these other beings. So that's what I would like to see.